We're in a super interesting spot with Cyberpunk 2077. The game's a bit over a year old now, it hasn't actually seen an update in around 6 months, but we're on the verge of something massive, seemingly. Lots of action behind the scenes on SteamDB. CDPR is working on something big. But we don't actually know when that's coming, and along the way, as we have been waiting, modders have been incredibly active, continuing to support and update this game, and even just recently, we got what is probably one of the best mods to ever come to Cyberpunk, definitely a top 5 for me, with a huge focus of a lot of these mods to attempt to add in some of the once promised or otherwise cut features. So with that said, let's first take a look at vehicle combat, and this mod is incredible, and even though the title suggests one thing, what this mod actually brings to the table holistically is pretty amazing for Cyberpunk. So first and foremost, as you are seeing in the background, this mod will add in the cut feature of shooting from vehicles in Cyberpunk, although I guess technically not fully cut. We do have it in that intro mission, so it is in the game, you just never really take advantage of it again. You can only use it in scripted segments, but this mod will implement it as a free form feature that you can use pretty much whenever you're driving a vehicle, or at least the vast majority of vehicles. It's really simple. Just take out a weapon as you're behind the wheel and you'll now be able to actually shoot and attack other enemies. You could use all kinds of different weapons, even though some of these logistically make zero sense to one hand while driving. You could also reload. You can also do things like heal yourself. As you aim out the window, you'll have this nice zoom in effect, so you get a better view of what's going on there, and you could aim much better. This mod is clearly intended for drive-bys, and you can continue to fully drive while doing this, shooting and firing at the same time. As you're noticing, you also do have to be in first person to actually use this one. There's no third person firing mechanic, but it does have a nice system where you could drive around in third person, then when you take out your weapon, it'll naturally transition to first person, and then you could transition back to third person once you're done firing. Shooting and driving is very difficult, not one of the easiest things to do, aiming while trying to actually navigate Night City and how quirky the cars and interactions with vehicles and other objects can be sometimes. But overall, it's a cool feature added in by this, and probably the least exciting feature of this mod overall, because this is also going to bring a full-fledged rework of the police system in Cyberpunk and actually just give enemies in general the ability to call for backup. And this backup's going to arrive in cars, and those cars can chase you. This will apply to police in general, so when you're actually fighting police, but then also when enemies are in their faction-specific area, so like the Valentinos in Haywood, the Maelstrom in Northside. Sometimes as you're fighting them, you'll notice that one of the enemies will have this little icon above them where they are calling for backup. It looks just like the quick hack icon, and basically if you let that finish, more people will arrive, most of the time in a vehicle, and a lot of times loaded up in a vehicle coming to attack you. This will add a star to your screen, and you get several stars if enemies continue to call for backup. You can actually control the cooldown in between backup calls with the settings menu, but by default there is a bit of a window between how often they could actually call. And this is awesome because it creates a situation where you could now kind of do a drive-by of sorts and then have a bunch of angry enemies chasing you down in a car as you're trying to run away in a car while also trying to shoot them in the process. It's a relatively simple feature on paper, but it makes these interactions so much more fun and interesting. And it makes a lot of sense. If you attack a bunch of gang members that are in their gang-controlled territory, they probably would call for some more gang members to come and show up and help them. But even further, this is going to extend to police also. And the police system gets a more comprehensive rework. Now, when you take down a bunch of random NPCs, if the police don't see it, they're not going to get mad at you. You will no longer stack police wanted level stars just from doing bad things or taking down police automatically. They will actually have to call for backup for you to gain an additional star. And naturally, if you take out all of the police very quickly, you'll never actually get to 4 stars. And even further, now when the police do call for backup, when you actually do get 1 star, if you let that cycle finish, these police enemies will too be showing up in vehicles, and the more stars you get, the more of a response you'll get. And this mod brings a variety of changes to the police depending on their response level. Now, they can actually call police netrunners to come and they will hack you. This previously wasn't really a thing. You could see netrunners with police sometimes, but with actual police spawns, now netrunners will pop up. MaxTac also gets an overhaul. By default, there's only one version of MaxTac members that can attack you. Now there's actually 5 different ones. Some of these will actually be using the Mantis Blades. There could be shotgunners, snipers, heavies, and even netrunners also though. And in general, they actually do have increased stats and some new abilities, making them way tougher fights and more dangerous to you overall. It's going to be more difficult difficult to get to 4 stars, especially depending on how long that window between calling for backup is. But if you do get to 4 stars, which sometimes can just be fun to actually get to, you're going to have a pretty tough fight in your hands. I'm using God mode because if I wasn't, I would be dying basically instantly from this. And overall, like some of the other police mods out there, this just makes the police system actually feel more natural. Enemies won't spawn right behind you, but rather spawn in a car down the block and drive up to you, which feels immensely more immersive. And one added benefit of this that's a bit of a lesser one, but is cool, is it actually reworks the health of most vehicles in the game. We're going to be spending a lot more time in and around vehicle combat, so now larger vehicles in general will have more health. Vehicles won't die as easily. But if you're in a armored police vehicle that is pretty big, you're probably going to survive for a while in there, and now you actually will with this mod. It makes the sandbox component of Cyberpunk way more fun, and for me, it's going to be my definitive police mod going forward. Enhanced Police does have some interesting mechanics that this doesn't, but I think this overall is a better and more interesting implementation. But then next up, in a very different vein, we have the E3 experience. Nexus recently released collections, which are basically mod packs or mod lists you could downloading a bunch of things at once. There's a couple of options for Cyberpunk right now, and the one I want to highlight today is the E3 experience, which is trying to make Cyberpunk more like what we saw in the E3 2018 demo. On one hand, actually being visual overhauls to both the HUD and the in-game lighting, and you could see some pretty significant changes here. I think I like this HUD a lot more, to be honest. On one hand, it definitely has that original hype and nostalgia from when we saw those snippets of gameplay, but the lighting too does feel like a fairly drastic change at times. It has a few extra mods like the wall hang mod and even the improved minimap zoom mod, so your map will zoom dynamically as you're driving in Cyberpunk. One of the other big mods to come out recently is the metro system mod, obviously adding back in the cut metro. I covered this on the channel before, but it has been getting steady updates and even just got an update a few days ago, making it even more functional in game, but even further actually adding in the new feature of these physical metro maps that look phenomenal, as well as there's custom icons next to the stations on the map, as well as some bug fixes and general improvements. So if you download that in the past, I definitely recommend downloading it again with some of these added benefits. And one mod that I think will be interesting to a lot of you that can be overlooked is the eye adaptation auto exposure fix, as well as vanilla or diverse weather option. So the only reason I actually downloaded this mod for this video was I was spending a bunch of time in cars. I kept having the auto exposure blind me in Cyberpunk, so I downloaded this mod just to fix that, to avoid the blinding light that Cyberpunk could sometimes provide. But I downloaded the optional version that does have the diverse weather cycle, so you'll have more weather variation in Cyberpunk, not just sunny all of the time. And it actually worked, which you might think, okay, yeah, obviously, but no, that's kind of shocking. There's a variety of weather mods for Cyberpunk attempting to actually create further variation in the weather or giving you more ways to change the weather. Over the past few months, I've been trying many of them. None of them are working for me. I don't know if it's just something to do with my game. I've tried with literally 0 mods, tried with a few mods, but for whatever reason, the eye adaptation auto exposure fix is the one weather mod that has been actually working. I noticed as I was playing, like, hey, there's a bunch of additional weathers in the background. It's the only weather mod I have on right now. So if you've been someone who's been trying those other weather mod options and things are just not going super well for you, I highly recommend trying this one out, as well as it does have the added bonus of fixing a rather frustrating bug slash feature in the game. But then lastly, if you are playing Cyberpunk, we do have the optical camo bug fixes. Optical camo was stealthily added with the last update to this game, a surprise cut feature that I'm very happy actually came. Unfortunately, it had some bugs. Like if you had the ghost perk, it would have a weird interaction, or sometimes if you don't have the ghost perk, the synaptic accelerator would have an interesting or wrong interaction. This will fix that, making sure you are properly invisible regardless of which version of optical camo you do use. With that said, that's the mods for this video. It's going to be an interesting little while for Cyberpunk. I'm very curious to see what happens with patch 1.5 and the next gen version. Perhaps even as you're watching this, we just got the announcement. I'm pre-recording this video a bit, but I'm very curious to see what ends up happening overall, because we have a lot that could happen with the mod scene. If a ton of people come back, mods getting updated, as they inevitably will need to get updated to actually work again. But also word on mod tools. I've mentioned in a few videos now that CDPR hired a bunch of mod developers. People that were working on mod tools on the community side got hired by CDPR. We don't know exactly for what, but I'm hopeful that it could be around more and further modability for this game. And even if none of that actually comes out with patch 1.5, it would be very cool if we could see some mentions of some of that with patch 1.5 and the ensuing news cycle. With that said, hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Hopefully you found it informative. As always, again, I thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.